Good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, Ayesha. We are here in the framework of inQuiete Festival, an annual festival of female writers that takes place in Rome in October. And it's a great pleasure to be here with Ayesha Harruna Attah. Ayesha is a Ghanaian writer. She was born in Ghana, but she's now based in Senegal. And she's already written several books, 5 books. And I will start this conversation from your book, The Deep Blue Between. In Italian is Il grande azzurro. Maybe I can show the cover, if you can see. That has been published in Italy by Macors y Marcos with the translation of Francesca Conte. First of all, congratulations, because I've just been told that it has been selected by the International Youth Library for the White Ravens catalog.
Yes, thank you.
So the story of Il Grande Azzurro is set in the Gold Coast, the former name of Ghana, at the end of 19th century. It is an historical fiction that tells the story of 2 young twin sisters, Hassana and Husseina, who got separated when their own town in the center of Ghana, in the forest, was raided by rebels. From this moment, the twins, who are 10 years old, so very, very young, starts 2 different lives. Hassana, the more extroverted one, more confident, who talks in the first person, is firstly given to the slavers, but she gets free with the help of some missionaries. She arrives in Accra, she starts working, she studies, and she finally finds her personal freedom. On the other hand, Husseina, the quieter twin, who talks in the third person, reaches Lagos in Nigeria, and with a religious congregation of women, she finally ends up in Bahia, in Brazil. So they experience 2 different lives, growing with an ocean between them, and experiencing different cultures, learning different languages, being in touch with different religions. But even separated, they remain connected in a very particular way, through their dreams. So at the end, we will discover something, but I don't want to spoil her. And this book is a sort of a spin-off of your previous book, another historical novel that talks about slavery in Africa, about the internal slavery. The 100 Wells of Salaga, in Italian is I 100 Pozzi di Salaga. A book that has a strong link with your family and with your personal story. So I would like to ask you what inspired you in writing these books and which is the link between them?
Okay, thank you for that wonderful introduction. The 100 Wells of Salaga was directly inspired by my learning about one of my ancestors, that she was born and then very soon in her life she was enslaved. And I wanted to find out more about her story. So I kept asking the family members who knew of her to tell me more, and they didn't have a lot of information. They knew that she'd come from northern West Africa. She was beautiful, and they knew that she ended up in the town of Salaga. So I started doing more research, and the more I tried to search, the more I found nothing. So I decided to imagine what her story could have been like, and that is what gave birth to the 100 Wells of Salaga. So part of imagining her story was to give her a family, and she had these 2 young twin sisters. So in the 100 Wells of Salaga, very soon, she and these girls are separated. But when I finished writing the 100 Wells of Salaga, I kept wondering as a writer, and I guess a lot of my readers also wondered, and the twins, what happened to the twins? So I kept thinking about them, and when the opportunity came, I knew I would write their story too. So the first was born because of my ancestor, and then the second book was born because of characters I couldn't forget about.
Thank you. So we talked about 2 novels that are historical fiction novels and told from a women point of view. And there is in your books a precise historical reconstruction of the society at the end of 19th century. And in the last years, many African writers, including many female writers, I'm thinking to Yaa Gyasi, Maza Mengiste, Yvonne Adiambo-Voir, have been engaged in historical novels. Which is, in your opinion, the reason of such a great interest in history? And secondly, do you think that looking back at the past can help to overcome some misconceptions maybe about the past and the present of African countries?
Yes, I think I'll answer the second question first. For me, doing this work of, digging up history and bringing it back into our consciousness, I think it is really important for understanding who we are, because some of that message gets lost along the way. For instance, because in the late, 18th and 19th centuries, there was a lot of missionary work. I think a lot of that religion just made us forget some of our ways of being. So in doing this historical fiction work, I'm showing how, African women lived their lives before, the church came and told them you can't do this and you can't do that, and using it hopefully as a roadmap for somebody else who needs to get into to a certain place in their lives. And yes, it is wonderful. It's there's so many women right now doing historical fiction and even nonfiction, and I think I don't know why it is more women now. There are some men involved in this work as well. I'm thinking of one Kenyan writer, for instance, Peter Klimani, I think is his name. And I think women just have tended to be the ones who bear stories. They're the ones who tell their children's stories and pass these down. So it's almost natural for women to be doing this work of, digging and then unearthing and then sending down. So to me, it's quite normal, and I'm surrounded by women who've always told stories and who've also been the keepers of information and traditions and sometimes things. So I've had aunties pass on things to me, like physical objects, like they've kept, and then they've passed on to me, and then I'll pass on to future generations as well. So even though they're doing that physically, we, the writers, we're doing that in another way, in an intellectual way, taking these things that have been passed on to us and then and dispersing them.
Thank you. And could you talk us a bit about your research process? So most of your novels are set in Ghana or involve Ghanaian characters, and are set in New York, in Lagos, or even in Salvador de Bahia, and in a really different historical period. So where did you get the information for your novels?
So sometimes the gathering begins way before I even know I'm going to be writing a novel. For instance, I lived in Bahia for 2 months in 2015, and I was working on the 100 Wells of Salaga at that point. So I didn't even know the twins' story at that. I didn't know I would be writing a book that would be set there. But whenever I'm in any place, I just try as much as I can to absorb as much as I can about the people, about the place, learn its history, learn how people ended up there. That's just who I am as a person. I want to know it all. And then, try local foods, just try everything. So I know why I'm in this place at this particular time, how it connects me to the people who are here, and how it connects me to my past. So I did that in Bahia, and I had all this information in my head. So when there was time to write the twin story, it just poured out seamlessly. So I've had that. And then in some cases, I'm lucky enough to go into spaces for books. But I think for the most part, I've been to all these places, and then they sort of inspire either stories or, whole novels. So that's one aspect of my research process, having visited a place. But I also do a lot of reading. So I go into archives, I go into old newspapers, a lot of academic journals as well. Sometimes it's very dry, but then you find all sorts of things in there. I will read, literature from a certain era. I'll read epic stories, poems, anything I can get my hands on. I will look at images. Those are so useful for me. If I can get an image that's sort of a snapshot of a time and place, then I can use it to create a scene. So it's visual as well. And when I can, it's talking to people and learning their stories. So it's a 3-pronged process.
So a great research process.
Yes.
So now on the topic of African literature, in recent years, we know that many African writers have received or have been selected for important awards, from Nobel Prize to Booker Prize to many others around the world. And we are happy to hear that finally the entire world is looking at the African literature. And in Africa itself, the landscape of literature is changing a lot. We know that the publishing industry is not the same in all countries, obviously. But generally speaking, how the African literary scene is changing.
How is it changing?
Yeah.
I think writers are bolder. They're exploring all sorts of terrain. So you have speculative fiction, you have historical fiction, you have romance, you have poetry, you have a lot of poetry on the continent. And so that is one aspect of it. But African writers have always delved into these different topics. But I think now there's this a little more exposure. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I think there's still a bit of tokenism. It's like, okay, let's give one African writer this opportunity. But I think if there were more opportunities for writers to be seen, then I'll say like the industry has really, really changed. And I think also on the continent itself, there are new publishing houses and a lot of literary journals that are being run by young writers. So that's very exciting as well. And these are platforms that are giving other writers opportunities to have their work seen. So in that regard, like this, and it's very Pan-African, it might be based in Namibia or in Kenya, but then you have writers from all over the continent, and it's fostered a sort of writerly community that seems to be quite productive.
Yeah, and just to extend a little bit on that, do you think that digitalization is helping this changing in the literary industry? I mean, through social network, for example, or online magazines or online festivals?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you can publish digitally is much faster than having to go through the whole printing process. I just wish and hope that writers can get paid well also, where it doesn't become, just free services they're offering. So I don't know if we're there. I don't think we're quite there yet. But yeah, with social media as well, there was a festival that was held during the pandemic, which was the Afrolit Festival, which was really wonderful because through the Afrolit Festival, I met so many new writers. And being here in the Netherlands, for instance, I'm meeting a Sierra Leonean writer, Vamba Sharif, and it's because of the Afrolit Festival. So it's fostering all these interesting relationships, even though we met virtually, because community is really important in this world, for me at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking to community, your books are available both in African countries and in Western countries. How have been the different audience reactions, if they have been different?
Mm-hmm. I feel like the Deep Blue Between has been interesting because it's been released in a lot of in Europe, so like in Italy, here in the Netherlands, in the UK. In West Africa, it's coming out this month. So I think that's really annoying my local Ghanaian and West African readers, because they've been waiting for a long time. It was released last year in the UK, and they keep asking, and it's been a year, but it's coming out this month. And then it was released in Brazil earlier this year, and that reaction was amazing, because for me, I was a bit nervous. I'm writing about a place that I've been to, but I can't claim to know, that well. I think what saved me is that Husaina visits it as a stranger, so she sees it as a stranger. So I wasn't writing as an expert on Brazil, but as a visitor to the country. And so the reactions have been quite positive, and a lot of people say it's so interesting to see the history of their country and then how it links to the wider African diaspora. So that's been really good feedback. But I'm also waiting for the book to arrive in West Africa to get that feedback.
Yeah. And I read that you set a book club for young people in Senegal. Can you talk a bit about this?
I'd love to. So I've always been a big reader. Books are just my escape, the ways I found certain answers to questions I've had. And so I had a brainwave, I think it was during the pandemic, like when the lockdown happened in our part of the world. And I was thinking, if I could get some, Kindles or ebook readers and get a group of young people together, we'll just read stories and discuss them, because I live in a village in Senegal that has maybe 5,000 people. So I see a lot of young people after school sort of sitting there. If they don't have after school projects, they seem very bored. So I said, okay, let me just start this. So I had a friend who was interested in the project and funded the buying of the e-readers. And we took off. We started reading some of the Senegalese classics that some of them might have read already, some not so much. So we started with So Long a Letter by Mariama Ba, which is such a wonderful book. And it was great because they responded to it so well, because it was an environment they knew. There were Wolof words in it. And then soon we took off to books that they would even suggest. So I was also discovering things. So yeah, it's still ongoing. We meet once a month. Now we go from about age 14 to 20. So it's a bit of a range, but everyone who comes has interesting ideas, and it's very light, so it doesn't feel like extra work for them. And I'm trying to get them to really own it as theirs, and then maybe it's a model I can replicate in other regions as well. But for now, we're just, a tiny group that reads a book once a month.
Thank you. So you wrote another book that is, it will be released in Italy next spring, again by Macors y Marcos, and the title is Zainab Conquista New York in Italian. Yes. So can you tell us something about this book?
Okay, so this was my pandemic book. Last year we didn't know what was going to happen to us, and I'd always wanted to write a really light romantic novel. So I said to myself, well, if we're all going to die, why don't you just do what you've always wanted to do? And so, yeah, it was a combination of 3 things that I wanted to do. I wanted to write a romantic novel. I wanted to write a book about New York, because I'd lived there, and it's such a city that lends itself to being written about. Like, I love books and films that are set in New York. They're just so great. And then the third thing was, another thing that I love doing is walking. So I wanted to write a book and pay homage to the act of walking, because I think there are lots of books that talk about running and other kinds of sports, but walking, not so many, I think. So I wanted to do all 3 things. So it's about Zainab, who moves to New York for graduate school, and she's looking for love, she's looking for friendship, she's looking to discover herself. And I don't want to give away too much, but suddenly she starts hearing voices. So these voices sort of control her, not even control, but they definitely affect the way her stay in New York shapes out. And so I hope everyone reads it. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. So something very far from historical fiction and the slavery.
Yes, but the twist is the book is still looking at those themes. There's still, Zainab is an illustrator, so she's using art as her medium. But there is still the exploration of the past in this book in a very special and different way. But it's also a book that is talking about the creative process, like how creators create. And I think once people read it, they'll see that it's directly leading to all my books in the way I work. So it's still very, very much in line with the work I've been doing, even though it's in a different genre and very light, it's still doing the same work.
Thank you. And can you tell us something about your creative process?
Okay, so I think I've finally managed to hone it to my shape, because when I started writing, I had a mentor, and so he gave me one way of working, which was to plan everything I was working on and then to use that as a roadmap. And imagine if you're driving from town A to town C. So the next step will be B and C. But you could decide that, oh, I actually want to go to C first and come back to B. Because you have your roadmap, you can change your route. So that was the process he gave me, which I still use. But I've also embraced not having a map and saying, okay, I've done my map from A to B to C, but maybe I'll just go around and then get to C and come back and see where it takes me. So my method combines these two methods of planning and also just writing and seeing where things go. And then each book is different. So I sort of lean into each book and the way it wants to be written. So Zainab was a book that I wrote with no map, no plan. I just wrote it and all these surprises came up. And The Deep Blue Between, I sort of had a map, but it was very magical as well, because things kept popping up that I couldn't have planned. So I think with each book that I write, it becomes a little less, road mapped and a little more magical for me.
Thank you. And I read that you studied biochemistry, so something very far from literature.
Yeah.
And when and why did you decide to become a writer?
I think I'd always written, I was the kind of person who had diaries, or I'd write little poems or little stories. And my sister and I had a running game. We played it for so long that it felt like almost like, a TV series, like a telenovela that never ended. So that was the same kind of process. We were telling stories and play acting. So I've always had this imaginary world going on, even as a child. And in high school, I decided to pursue science. I really enjoyed biology. I was good at it. And I think just I hadn't really seen writers thrive. My parents were journalists, but to make money, it was so difficult. And like the political climate would affect whether you would sell your newspaper or not. So it didn't seem like a way to be able to make a living. So I thought, okay, be a doctor. Doctors seem to be paid well. But when I got to college, I started taking more classes and interning in a hospital. And I just knew that wasn't where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. I couldn't see myself going into a hospital every day. So slowly that dream began to just fade away. And then I took more writing classes. And then the switch happened when I went to grad school for journalism. And that was my first step. I said, okay, if I do journalism, I can work in a magazine and get paid for writing or editing. And then slowly just made my way into really what I wanted to do, which is write books. So, yeah.
And now do you live in a small village in Senegal?
Yes.
It's right near the sea.
Yes.
So you left Accra.
Yes, I left Accra. Actually, a long time ago. I left Accra. Well, not really, because I'm always in and out, but I haven't lived there for a long stretch since maybe before I left for university. There was a stretch where I was there for about 9 months, but it's always been in and out, and then going to discover other cities. And now I live in Senegal pretty much full time.
And which are your favorite writers?
It changes, but I guess the ones that I keep going back to writers like Naguib Mahfouz, Toni Morrison. Then there are some young writers that are just doing some genius work, like Novuyo Rosa Tuma, and all sorts of books inspire me for different ways. So there are stories that I've read in my book club. One of them is by a Senegalese writer called Birago Diop, and it was just so funny. It was such a funny story. It was a play. So it's one that I recommend to people who want to learn about Senegal or to read a lighthearted book. So yeah, it changes, but I think these are the ones on my register now, and Italo Calvino as well. So yeah.
So thank you very much, Ayesha. Do you want to tell to our Italian listener something else?
Oh, well, thank you for having me on, and I hope you get the deep blue between Il Grande Azzurro and I 100 Porti di Salaga. These are stories that, even though are very local, very West African, are still universal themes, you know, about families and about love and what we'll do to stay healthy and sane, you know. So I hope festival goers have a chance to get copies of these books. And I'm available on social media if people want to engage or ask questions. So, yeah.
So thank you. Many, many thanks to Ayesha, and good luck for everything.
Thank you.